Good afternoon. I have been trying to cast Gravetide, and I've learned a couple things. First, thanks to all my sponsors, Art, Patreon. Buy some dice. I gotta get some dirty trick dice. Any ideas for what to do for like a die at the table that shows how many dirty tricks you have? What are you gonna be doing? Let me know in the comments. Come hang out in Discord. That's not right. Bam. Okay, so here we have some Cruel Boys. Oops, we just have like a pretty standard map here. For those that don't know, you grab Gravetide over here. Where are you, my friend? Suffocating Gravetide. Okay, so like if you're playing a Cruel Boys list, let's say, and you're 1 or 2 casts, and you decide that you wanna, there's not really that much to cast on turn 1, and you're looking for a manifestation to cast, and you happen to be taking this lore. But what we're going to talk about is true of sort of the, I still want to call them predatory endless spells, right? Those that, move around and have a move characteristic. The way you set up, like Shackles as an example, is a little bit different, but we'll talk about that. So let's say that I've deployed my army, and I have, let's say, a reinforced unit of Gut Rippers, sort of over here, and then I have a Sledge Raker Beast hanging out behind him, whatever. And then let's say I just have like my caster. We'll just grab Gobsprack here and throw Gobby in the mix here as well. Let's say that we even deployed really far forward. Okay. So then I want to cast Gravetide. So it has to be set up wholly within 12. So wholly within 12, and then more than 9 away from my enemies. So if this is the first turn, right, it's got to be set up sort of in a position like this. And then, of course, there's always going to be terrain and everything in the way, but I think you sort of get the idea. But the problem then comes in the movement phase, because this thing doesn't get to move. And so if the Gut Rippers want to move 5 inches forward or further, it sort of blocks them up a little bit, right? And so we end up with this Gravetide thing right out in front of us. Now, this might not be the worst thing in the world that you're trying to do, but just know that that's what's going to happen if you cast it on turn 1. You're going to get choked up here in the center. So if you plan on sticking the manifestation out in front of your army, it's going to change a couple things. One, it's going to change the distance that the enemy has to charge into you, right? So you're going to be an easier charge. So this is not a problem if the enemy is really fast, right? If the enemy is like Ideneth or something, and you know that they're all gonna like run in charge, right? So then you can sort of, you're like, okay, well, you're gonna get me anyway, and so I'm just gonna put this forward as like a little piece of defense, right? And then I'm gonna sort of put my Gut Rippers around them so that I can kind of, defend against it, against like your charge, right? Like it's denying surface area. So like combat range is 3 inches. Right, so it is going to be denying like a little bit of space where you can get in, right? And then they kind of have to pick a side almost. They will fight the Gravetide and it will die, but it will sort of zone them out and absorb some of their attacks into a manifestation instead of into the unit, right? So that's something that you can do, right? However, if you decide instead to cast it in your opponent's magic step, you are losing 1 to cast, so depending on the manifestation, but some of the manifestations cast on 6s, and if you're playing a wizard with +1 to cast, like let's say a Swamp Call, a Shaman, you sort of negate that, right? Like +1 casters are significantly better counter casters because they the difference between 6 and 7 is really big. Like a 7-inch charge versus an 8-inch charge, it's like you start to feel the difference. Now you're not likely to get it. So if you're getting -1 to cast, then it's a 7-inch or it's a 7 to cast, and you're getting -1, that really sucks. But if it's like a 6 to cast, right, and you're getting +1 and -1 at the same time, it's like, okay, right? Like now I kind of feel like this thing could actually kind of get out there. Like I'm getting value out of my command point. Anyway, but if you do that, then it looks more like this. Like let's say that you go second, and then the suffocating Gravetide goes in the same thing. Well, now in your movement phase, this thing gets to move its 12 inches, and then these guys are going to do whatever they are going to do, right? They're going to either be, you know, defensive and stay back, or they're going to push into the center and whatever else, right? And this Gravetide actually gets to do its thing, right? Because it moved. So when your turn, you start your turn, it flies across the table and it moves. So a cool move that you can do with this manifestation lore is you can take on your turn. Here, let me just grab them real quick. Oops. You can take Shackles, which is... Oh, I guess it's just the one, because you just... So there's 3 of these things, right? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, let me know in the comments if I am wrong, but I believe they're set up wholly within 18. And then they have to be set up pretty close to each other. I can't remember if it's 6. I mean, I guess I can just pull it up on the screen next to me here in Discord. These are all pinned in the Age of Sigmar chat, by the way. Because I don't think there's an official release out for these yet. Yep. They must be within 3 inches of each other. So relatively short distance. Okay, but that's still, you know, that's a pretty good spread. So you cast this in your turn if you have to go first, right? Would be like the first manifestation that you would cast. And then you cast the Gravetide after that, right? And then it's like slowing them on their turn, or sorry, on their turn. It's like suddenly it's like, oh, okay, like Shackles are up, that's annoying, and then also Gravetide is up. So they're going to be able to like charge and pile in through all of these things, right? In fact, maybe in that case you probably even put Gravetide even further back, right? Because it moves far. It's got a move characteristic of 12, so it's like it can get places. But this way, right, it's like you're kind of getting you're surprising them with the Gravetide. It's like if you don't counterspell it right now, then it's gone. And then if you have a +1 caster, again, it's like you're kind of, those odds are getting in your favor a little bit more. Yeah, so it's still really early days. But I think the Swamp Call, I'm kind of liking the Swamp Call of Shaman a little bit more now for a couple reasons, but we'll talk about that in another video. I've always liked the Swamp Call of Shaman. Like, subscribe. Wow.